Hello Year 12. As part of your studies this week, we've asked you to read through this article, The Bell Jar, a Psychological Case Study. I feel like it looks quite intimidating if you just look at it. It's around 10 or 11 pages long. It has some quite high-level technical language within there, but I feel like there is enough within this that makes it really useful for a number of you, particularly if you're going to be looking at, as your angle for your NEA, something like society, femininity or the female experience, mental health, patriarchy, control, anything like that. This is going to be a useful way into that AO5 for you. And I know that's the assessment objective that some of you are a little concerned about as well. So this is the type of thing that you need to be looking at and referring to. Obviously, a good way of starting this is to skim through it and then to read the parts that you're interested in, because like I said, it's quite a dense, perhaps intimidating document at first, and then you can always expand out and read more of it as you feel more confident or as you zoom in on what you are going to be talking about in your NEA. So I'm going to read through the first paragraph of this for you. I'm going to explain a couple of bits, and then I'm going to do a very brief overview of the rest of the article. The bell jar is an image that readers of 20th century literature recognise all too well. The suffocating, airless enclosure of conformism, making life hell for an iconic 19-year-old girl in the 1950s, is on par with Holden Caulfield's Carousel. The bell jar itself is an isolated object, is simple enough to characterise, a smothering, stiff, unbreakable case, the captive helplessly enclosed within its glass walls. However, the embedded symbolic meaning is slightly more obscure. Many critics argue the bell jar as a symbol of society's stifling constraints and befuddling mixed messages that trap Sylvia Plath's heroine, Esther Greenwood, within its glass dome. However, another, often overlooked reality is that the physical, albeit metaphorical, suffocation induced by the bell jar is a direct representation of Esther's mental suffocation by the unavoidable settling of depression upon her psyche, and that this circumstance greatly alters the way in which the entire novel can and should be perceived. So just a couple of points about this introduction. When it talks about Holden Caulfield's Carousel, so Holden Caulfield is the main character, protagonist of a very famous novel that was published a couple of years before The Bell Jar, so it's Catcher in the Rye, and his Carousel is very much a representation of life, being that it's cyclical, represents ups and downs, etc. And so we can see hopefully that this literary metaphor that Plath uses of the bell jar is not something unique to just this novel. It's something that is used again and again, but also something that you can make connections with other literary texts with as well. When it talks about conformism making life hell for an iconic 19-year-old, that idea of conformism, just so that we understand that term, it's this idea of accepting established practices, behaving as expected, being conventional. And that's obviously, as we've been reading The Bell Jar, it's something that we understand that Esther herself is struggling with. She feels conflict with her inner thoughts and the way that she's presenting herself to the world. And perhaps it's that conflict that's creating those cracks. This introduction is key, and the reason I wanted to read it out to you is because I think it does sum up this whole article and a different angle from which we've been looking at it. The angle that perhaps it's not actually something external that's having an impact upon Esther. It's not this idea of societal expectations that's affecting her mental health, but instead, perhaps it's something internal. It's a conflict that's being represented, a personal conflict. And the novel, instead of being a study of society, a critique of society, instead perhaps it's a study of mental ill health. It's something much more personal. And as I said, that's supported by the fact that we know that this is semi-autobiographical. You need to be looking at Plath herself to understand some of the nuances of this text. So, in terms of the article or the piece as a whole, it's worthwhile, like I said, just having a skim through, thinking about the parts of the text that you found interesting, and then perhaps looking at where those things are coming up within this study of the psychological background. If we think about it in terms of a psychological study, Esther herself as a character has quite a unique perspective. She has a unique perspective. Her life is characterised very much by the idea of distance, of disengagement, and she feels disenfranchised. She doesn't feel like she is powerful within her life. She doesn't feel active within her life. She feels quite passive and quite distant. She doesn't feel like she fits in. And although she doesn't actually express that explicitly, it's possible that these feelings of guilt and shame that have been created from this feeling of knowing that her life looks good from the outside, but not actually feeling grateful for that life that she has and the opportunity she's been given, perhaps those feelings of guilt and shame have manifested as, or contribute to, her downward spiral that is illustrated throughout the text. That's connected very closely to this idea here. So Aaron T. Beck, a psychiatrist, recognised that vulnerability to depression in part is a function of the environment that's been created by the person, not by the society that they're living in, but by the person themselves. It's something inward rather than something external, something inherent to yourself rather than something that is a factor outside of your being. So have a look through this article. I hope that you find some things in there that you can engage with, and please do ask any questions if you have anything that you want to clarify. Good luck, guys.